Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the ongoing talks between world powers and Iran to end the economic sanctions against Iran if it gives up plans to develop nuclear weapons. These talks are between Iran and the P5+1, that is 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany. After these talks made some initial progress, the European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief Catherine Ashton invited US Secretary of State John Kerry and Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif for a trilateral meeting. No one knows for sure what kind of progress has been made in the negotiations so far, nor does one know about the critical issues that remain to be resolved. However, all the comments coming from Geneva, where the talks are being held, are positive. In this context, the questions that need to be answered are: what are the circumstances which have made the present negotiations possible? What kind of agreement is possible at Geneva? Can Iran be prevented from developing nuclear weapons, or would this process only delay that eventuality? How will Iran's neighbors in the region and the rest of the world view the outcome of the negotiations? To answer these questions, I have with me a very distinguished panel of experts. We have Ambassador Rajiv Sikri. As Secretary in Ministry of External Affairs, he oversaw Iran, knows the region well. We have Professor A.K. Ramakrishnan. He's chairperson of Center for West Asian Studies at JNU's School of International Studies. And we have Ambassador Vivek Katju. He has overseen Iran for a record number of 6 years in the Ministry of External Affairs and also knows the country well. So welcome, gentlemen, to this conversation. Ambassador Sikri, let me begin with you. Tell us about these talks that are going on in Geneva. Do you think they became possible after the election of Rouhani and the coming together internally of Iran on the one hand, and in US because President Obama is in his second term and he probably sees Iran, he wants to leave Iran settlement as part of his foreign affairs legacy?
It's true that without a new president, it would have been very difficult for Iran to have moved away from the rhetoric of Ahmadinejad. And you're also right that President Obama in his second term needs to show why he got the Nobel Peace Prize in the first place. But I think that there is another important reason why these talks have taken off, and that is the situation in the region where the jihadis, the Sunni fundamentalists, those forces are gaining strength. And on that, both the United States and Iran are united. Secondly, in Iraq, the United States wants to see if they can somehow balance the growing Shia influence which Iran has, and for that it needs to cut a deal. So the nuclear element is a bargaining chip, in my view, for trying to reach a larger strategic consensus. You see, the United States now wants to have a presence in the region, some influence in the region. Saudi Arabia is no longer that influential or that reliable an ally, and it's linked with the Sunni fundamentalists. And don't forget that Iran was a very key ally of the United States.
Much earlier, during Shah's time.
Yeah. Yep. So now I think the correlation of geopolitical forces is such, it is bringing together Iran and the United States for a possible deal. The nuclear issue, I must emphasize, in my view, is essentially a bargaining chip. That is why it was taken from the IAEA to the Security Council so that the United States could have a lever against Iran.
Professor Ramakrishnan, do you think that these negotiations also became possible for Iran because Iran found itself weakened rather than strengthened as it overextended itself from Afghanistan to Syria, one, and secondly because it started feeling the real pain of sanctions. Its oil revenue went down by 50%.
Yes, the sanctions have affected the people, and they have responded through their elections, and Rouhani is there. And the promise of improvement in the economic conditions is a very significant thing as far as the Iranians are concerned. That kind of open leadership that you see with Rouhani is a reflection of that. And if the nuclear negotiations are going on now with some positive outcome, the Iranian people have to be congratulated first. And then on the other side, President Obama, even during his presidential campaign, was talking about Iran, settling the issue with Iran through diplomatic means.
Yeah, but I was asking you whether it's a weakened Iran that's going into negotiations.
I don't think so, because the Syrian issue for Iraq, and most importantly for Afghanistan, when the United States actually needs an important power like Iran, which has tremendous potential for influencing some of these important crisis issues and zones.
Okay, Vivek, why should this not be seen as yet another time-buying scheme by the Iranians, where they get some concessions from the United States without actually entirely stopping their program?
I had in an earlier segment of your program taken the view that it will be difficult for the Iranians to give up their aspirations for a nuclear weapon, notwithstanding whatever they've been saying. As of now, I am not persuaded to change that view. I respect all that Ambassador Sikri has said here, that there is a larger geostrategic and geopolitical context in which these talks are being held. But I cannot help but think that an Iran with nuclear weapons is something which the West as a whole, the United States, and Israel, let's not forget Israel in this context, cannot contemplate with any kind of ease.
So you are saying that it is a time-buying exercise?
No, what I'm saying is that the jury is out as yet.
Okay.
Because the Iranians have again reiterated something which they've always maintained, that they are not in this for a weapon, but given the fact that Pakistan has a weapon, also that the Saudis may get a buy-in into that weapon, I cannot imagine that Shiite Iran would give up its aspirations.
All right, we need to take a break at this point. We'll continue with this discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the talks that are going on in Geneva to lift sanctions on Iran in return for Iran giving up any plans to develop nuclear weapons. Professor Ramakrishnan, I wanted to come to you. US President Obama has discouraged Congress from imposing additional sanctions on Iran. In Iran, you have the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, telling hawkish critics of the president and of the foreign minister that, look, keep quiet, stay back, don't attack Foreign Minister Zarif's team. Are these not signs that both countries are quite serious about a settlement, contrary to what our friend Ambassador Katju was saying?
I think they are serious this time because of the factors that we have mentioned earlier, and also because it is too long that a country like Iran can be kept away from a proper relationship as far as the United States is concerned. As Ambassador Sikri was pointing out, that old ally of the United States, if in some way Iran can be brought into the picture, the United States' own standing within the West Asian region and in the Gulf region would be much higher. Yes, there are opposition from other Gulf players and Israel and so on, but at the same time, Iran's influence on several issues which the United States have to deal with immediately, particularly the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the Syrian issue, etc. Iran has a lot to offer, and the opportunity through Rouhani's election, and so that if that opportunity is not utilized properly, then it will be a big missed chance.
All right. Mr. Sikri, as far as these negotiations are concerned and their focus is concerned, the tasks are cut out for both sides. The US has to show that it's persuaded Iran not to develop nuclear weapons, and Iran has to show that it's persuaded them to lift sanctions. So if there is a bargain, what kind of a bargain do you see emerging out of these negotiations?
Well, according to the reports that have come out, this will be only an initial bargain valid for about 6 months, kind of a confidence building step till the contours of a final settlement are eventually worked out. For the United States, I think the critical issues will be that they stop the enrichment of uranium. What do they do with the stocks of uranium? They will have intrusive inspections to make sure that Iran is complying with whatever has been agreed upon.
But those would be by the International Atomic Energy Agency.
I believe that the head of the Atomic Energy Agency is going tomorrow.
Going to Tehran.
Tomorrow,
Going to Tehran.
Yeah, he's going to Tehran tomorrow. So, so this shows that they are serious. As far as the Iranians are concerned, I think that they are unlikely to compromise on the fundamental right that they have under the NPT to enrich uranium.
Okay. Vivek, do you agree that Iranians would be prepared to halt uranium enrichment at 20%? Or do you go along with what the Iranian deputy foreign minister said? He said Tehran would be prepared to, I quote, negotiate over the size, form and dimensions of enrichment. Would it mean temporarily halting enrichment at 20%, not installing more centrifuges, and as Ambassador Sikri is suggesting, allowing inspections?
No, the question here is whether the Western powers will be willing to live with enrichment up to 20%. Because I don't think they are wanting a standstill. They want a rollback. They want Iran to go back to 5% and not more than 5%, because once you have 20%, the game is over. After that, it's not all that, technically not all that difficult to go in for further enrichment so that it becomes weapons capable, the enriched material. That is where I think the real crux will come, because from all accounts that I have seen, at the moment the Iranians are front-loading this by wanting that the sanctions on oil and banking should be eased.
We'll come to that in a minute.
Okay.
Do you think, Professor Ramakrishnan, that they would roll back? Rolling back would really mean, as Ambassador Sikri said, you take away the enriched uranium. You cannot de-enrich it.
Yeah. No, they will assert their rights under the NPT regime.
Yeah.
At the same time, they will be willing to make the time adjustment within the given contours of utilizing the whole nuclear program for peaceful purposes. Within that broad objective, whatever it could buy, it will do, because the sanctions are the major issue. On the oil sector, on the banking thing, yep. These are the two things they are bargaining for, and
yep.
if they can get something out of this, they will be ready for adjustments within the other sector.
Ambassador Sikri, do you think Tehran would be satisfied merely by the world allowing them to export oil, receive payment for oil already supplied, and unfreeze their assets, or would they also have to give assurances to please the critics of Rouhani at home, that is the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, who are saying that you must give a commitment that you don't stand for regime change?
Well, on regime change, President Obama, I think, had already signaled in his UNGA speech that they're not looking for regime change. He also acknowledged CIA's role in the 53 coup. So, some front-loading of concessions was there. I think that the United States will press Iran hard, because they have so many lobbies to cater to. But I think that a deal is possible. I think that a deal is possible, and it should come about, because we have probably the most propitious and favorable circumstances in a decade. And if this opportunity is lost because of the influence of hardliners on either side, then I think it will get more and more difficult. Let's recall that in 2003, the Iranians had adhered to the additional protocol. They hadn't signed it, but they had adhered to it. That was a kind of a concession on their part. But in their perception, the West merely pocketed that concession and then said, okay, now let us talk. So the Iranians will be a little careful on how much they give.
Yeah.
I don't think I respectfully disagree with Ambassador Katju. I think that Iranians are fairly intelligent and smart people, and I'm sure that they have understood that were they to actually develop nuclear weapons, these sanctions which they are seeking to have removed, would actually intensify multifold.
Okay. We'll continue with this discussion after the break because we've run out of time on this segment. We'll be back again soon. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the ongoing negotiations to lift sanctions on Iran in lieu of Iran giving up its plans to develop nuclear weapons. Vivek, you wanted to say something before we went on the break.
No, I wanted to say just a couple of things. One, I think this has been a very significant development, no doubt about it. It's a development we should welcome. Why I'm also conscious, as Ambassador Sikri has put it so well, that they are a very intelligent and at one level a very pragmatic people. I am reminded of the fact that it was Ayatollah Khomeini who I think it was in 1989, wasn't it, when the Iran-Iraq war had to end. He had come and told his people that the time has come when we must drink from the poisoned cup and accept that there will be a resolution without an outright victory. But here, my thought is that the West will not agree to anything short of irreversible steps, because they want to finish this program completely, the program to develop nuclear weapons, which the Iranians of course deny. Now, can Ayatollah Khamenei, in his way, in his manner, convoluted or whatever, come before his people and say a similar thing, that we will give up this right? He won't say it directly. The Iranians very seldom say something directly, forever. And how will the Basijis and the Pasdaran react to all this?
Who are the Basiji and the Pasdarans?
Well, they are the Revolutionary Guards. Yeah. They are the Janissaries of the revolution. So that is where my skepticism is coming.
All right. But going back to the deal, Professor Ramakrishnan, this lifting of sanctions, how much of it can be done by the US President through an executive order? And would he need congressional approval for doing certain other things? So it's one thing for US and the P5 to come to an agreement, and quite another to implement the agreement, because the modalities may be quite difficult.
A large part of it is American sanctions, and the hawkishness within a certain section of American lawmakers, etc., is there, and the pressure of Israel and so on. But there is another large chunk of US Congress people who are ready for the kind of negotiations that are going on and accept the outcome of that.
My point was that there are things that the president can do through executive order.
Yes.
There are others he cannot do through executive order, and he has to go to the Congress. And there he'll have to use a lot of political capital to get his way.
That's why I said there is a chunk of lawmakers that he can depend upon.
Okay. Ambassador Sikri, do you think Iran will get the assurance? They've said that if there are intrusive inspections, then their nuclear facilities should not be damaged in any way, and that the United States should give a guarantee that they will protect Iran against any Israeli attack.
I think the Iranians will want the right to enrich uranium in principle.
Yeah.
They will not get the right to enrich it up to 20%, because as Vivek has said, that means they have that will not be given. But Ayatollah Khamenei himself has said that Iran does not seek nuclear weapons, and he is kind of a fatwa which has been there. So in that sense, he has already told the Iranians.
He also kept saying that ours is a peaceful program.
But there's a big difference.
Yes.
That we have not signed the NPT. If Iran were to develop nuclear weapons as a member of the NPT, then it creates a problem.
Yes, absolutely.
We have not done so. And there were no sanctions against us of the kind there are against Iran. So I think that Iran will be very careful that now that it is so close to getting the sanctions removed, then to screw it up.
Yeah.
I think it would be singularly foolish on their part. And that is why you see such an accommodative stance on the part of the Iranian negotiators.
Okay. Vivek, what might be the attitude of Israel to such a settlement? Because their fear is that Iran will somehow sucker the world into believing that it's going to give up its nuclear weapons plan, get the benefits it can get, and do nothing and sit pretty.
I think their reaction as of now is pretty ballistic.
Absolutely.
And their reaction is when this process is just beginning, and there are some signs that it might be positive, at least for some time to come. The Israelis will pull out all the stops, because unless the Iranian nuclear program is completely eliminated, they will not rest in peace, especially if there is no regime change. Let's not forget that as far as Iran is concerned, they are still committed to the fact that the destruction of Israel should be accomplished.
Okay. Professor Ramakrishnan, how would the other important countries in West Asia view a settlement like this?
Before going into other actors on Israel, you see, Prime Minister Netanyahu is talking about a bad deal before even a deal is being reached. On Saudi Arabia and Israel share the view that a kind of agreement or deal with Iran will be detrimental to their kind of interest in the region. Actually, no Arab neighbor of Iran.
Turkey's encouraging such a deal.
Turkey, because it has that linkage with the NATO and other things. But for Saudi Arabia, it's very difficult to fathom such a kind of American deal, and they feel that the United States is increasingly going away from them in many of the matters of their concern within the region.
I just wanted to say, I think this is very welcome. We should encourage it.
Yeah.
It's just that I'm very skeptical.
Yeah. You wanted to say something?
I think what Professor Ramakrishnan has said really brings me back to the first point that I made, that if there is a deal with Iran, it will change the geopolitics of the region. Absolutely. Because the role of Israel and Saudi Arabia in American foreign policy in the region will be greatly reduced. That is why Saudi Arabia is so worried about it. That is why Israel is so worried about it. Also, a deal that actually ensures that Iran does not develop nuclear weapons will put the spotlight on Israel's own nuclear program. What is Israel's status? It is shouting so much about other countries' program, but it maintains a complete silence on whether it has got nuclear weapons or not. Everyone knows that it has it, but that will be in the focus. Just as the deal with Syria on chemical weapons has brought the focus on Israel. Okay. So that is the problem.
We are running out of time. So
Just one last thing. I'm no advocate of Israel, but if I recollect correctly, they too haven't signed the NPT.
I know, but they have not said whether they have a nuclear weapons program or not.
But what I want all of you to do quickly is tell me in one sentence, what should be India's attitude to lifting of sanctions against Iran and Iran giving up its nuclear weapons?
We should encourage this completely.
Okay. Professor?
If sanctions are lifted, it will be of immense help to India.
We can start importing oil again and start paying for it.
Oh yes.
Last word for you, Master Sikri.
Definitely. I think anything which improves Iran's position means that there are fewer impediments to our bilateral relations developing with Iran, and we should welcome it. Iran is important to us from a larger perspective, and if there's a little more peaceful and stable environment here, it is to our interest.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. I thank all of you for coming here and analyzing the situation for our viewers. And I hope once the deal is through, we'll all be back here again and I'll show you some more clips to skeptics as well as people who are very optimistic. That's all we have for you. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another interesting issue. Till then, goodbye.